Webinar started. It's been okay. Okay, lovely. Perfect. Perfect. Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another beautiful webinar. We've got the Euro Manganese company presenting today with Dr. Matthew James. Now, Dr. James, I think we've spoken to a few high purity companies in the past, definitely not manganese, but we're very interested in hearing about that. I know there's definitely a few investors that are very new to the space, and I know that you're going to do a bit of presentation, but just briefly, what is the main attraction towards high purity? And obviously we'll get through in the presentation, but what's the main attraction towards it?
Thanks, Lachlan. Yeah, well, as you can see here, I'm poised to support the energy transition because high purity manganese is one of the key ingredients in the battery cathode of EVs or any batteries, for energy storage as well. So it's a really important element um, to, move forward as we progress into the EV transition.
Lovely, lovely. Well, just for those people just joining at the moment as well, just so you know, there is a Q&A button down just at the bottom. If you want to post your questions like that, we'll have a 10-minute period to answer those questions for you. But apart from that, we might just get started on the presentation, and thank you all for joining us.
Great, thanks, Lachlan. Good morning or afternoon, everyone. Great to be here. Just got to work this out. So, standard forward-looking statement. So, just a quick 101 on high purity manganese. As I mentioned just now, it's an essential element in most cathode for lithium-ion batteries. But it's the most affordable element. As you can see on the right here, in a typical 622 battery, it's 17% of the weight, but it's only 1% of the cost. And that's going to become really important as we move into the mass market of the vehicles where they need to produce lower, more affordable batteries. It's NMC is a typical battery cathode, nickel, manganese, cobalt. You may have also heard of LFP, and they're now adding manganese into LFP to produce LMFP batteries. And they typically contain between sort of 20, ranging up to 80% manganese, depending on what chemistry you're using. And it really doesn't matter what emerging technology comes along for batteries, the vast majority of them all use manganese. So whether it's lithium-ion batteries or sodium-ion batteries, or of these various acronyms you can see here, which represent different cathode chemistries, manganese plays a critical role. So the chances of a new technology coming along that doesn't use manganese is very low at this point in time.
Right.
So there are three tailwinds for high purity manganese. Just the underlying growth of the EV market, which maybe has slowed in the last few months, but it's still growing very rapidly. So whilst it was growing extremely rapidly before, it's now still growing above 20% per annum. And a number of companies, and here are just a select number, have committed to switching to 100% EV or 90% EV in terms of Renault or Volvo by 2030. So that's growing the overall demand. And then, as I mentioned before, the need to produce more affordable cars, and for an EV car, the battery can range between 30 to 50% of the cost. And the most expensive part of the battery is the cathode, which is where manganese plays the role. So there's a drive to develop what we call manganese-rich chemistries in these batteries. Umicore, BASF all have manganese chemistries which range between 60 to 70% manganese. And that is one way to lower the cost of the EV cars as they move into the mass market. For Euro Manganese, what's also playing a critical role is the change in legislations both in Europe and the US. The US is the one that people have probably most heard about, the Inflation Reduction Act. That requires 40% of batteries or of battery raw materials to come from a US or free trade country. And that's rising by 10% each year to 80% by 2027. But what's really important for manganese is that by 2025, any vehicle that needs to qualify for the tax credit can't have any material extracted, processed, or recycled from a foreign entity of concern. So, as we will see in a moment, China dominates this market, and China is considered a foreign entity of concern. In Europe, they've just passed the Critical Raw Materials Act, which is now in force, and that also has various targets for local sourcing of material. 10% to be extracted, 40% to be processed, and 25% to be recycled within the EU. And as we look at the global supply and demand picture, currently 90+% of high purity manganese comes out of China. What you can see here is the forecast demand in light blue by 2030. And the red is the shortfall in supply. There is no high purity manganese processing in North America today. They're relying on early stage or some advanced projects coming into production by 2030, but there's still a shortfall. There's a very, very small plant in Belgium importing ore from Africa. And then our project is in the Czech Republic. So the only integrated project with its own ore source in the EU. And that will be about 100,000 tons of high purity manganese sulfate, but still a massive deficit in Europe. And even in China, the forecast growth means that by 2030, even with projects that have been announced, they're still going to have a shortfall within China itself. So this is what's often called the forgotten battery metal. Everyone talks about lithium, nickel, cobalt, but manganese is a critical element today, and also one that's growing very strongly when it's going to have a demand-supply gap. So moving on to the company itself, we have a unique project in the Czech Republic, the only integrated project in the EU, and we are the only project globally that can have a circularity condition. That's because we're processing historical mine tailings. It's got a 25-year mine life with more than 25 million tons sitting on surface already processed, finely ground, so no mining activity required. We have a demonstration plant on site, which I'll talk about, and that's produced on-spec product through our process. We have finished our feasibility study, and that's showing a strong 1.3 billion net present value on our base case with a $750 million capital expenditure. So just to dive into some of these more deeply, here you can see the 3 cells sitting on surface. As I mentioned, it's already processed, so we don't have to do any crushing, grinding, or milling, and we just excavate this material and put it into our process. This is actually a polluting site. It was put down about 50 years ago in the Czechoslovakia communist era, so it's not lined. It was a pyrite mine before, so that's iron sulfate to produce sulfuric acid. And because it's not lined and it was a sulfur-based material, it's actually leaching sulfates into the groundwater every day, about a ton. As we process this, we'll put our tailings back using best practice tailing management so lined, dry stacked, and capped. It's actually remediating this site as well as extracting the high purity manganese.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So we completed a life cycle assessment which shows that net positive environmental benefits. We're actually using 100% renewable power. We have an MOU with Statkraft. And that means our CO2 footprint, which is really important for the customers, is 1/3 of that of the incumbent industry today. We won't use any fresh water. We use industrial wastewater from a neighboring power plant. And we actually even recycle some of our own CO2 and hydrogen in our process. Because of this great environmental benefits, we have very strong social support. We have received our environmental permit, and during the social commentary period, there were no comments from the local municipalities, from the local community, or any NGOs. Another reason for that is 1/3 of the government royalties in the Czech Republic flow back down to the local municipalities.
Mm.
We're in the Czech Republic, which is part of the EU, an EU country, so they have very strong government frameworks, and we obviously have a very high standard of governance within our listed company as well. So being in the Czech Republic, we're ideally positioned to benefit from that regulations, both in the EU and the US I spoke about. And we do have some incentives from the Czech government in terms of tax credits. We have road, rail, gas, electricity, and water all on site. We don't have to build any of that infrastructure. And being on that road and rail network, we can easily serve both the EU and the US.
Wow.
And I mentioned we have our main environmental permit. That's a key gating permit in the Czech Republic. So all remaining permits are just more procedural. Really important, we have a demonstration plant on site. We are the only developing project that has reached this stage of having a large demonstration plant, which is orders of magnitude higher than the standard pilot plant. And some of the key pieces of equipment in the demonstration plant are scaled at industrial scale. This is produced on-spec product, both what we call high purity manganese sulfate, monohydrate, and high purities electrolytic manganese metal. Both of those are products that can be sold in the market, and they both met target specifications with both the plant specs and customers. And we've now received our permanent operational permit. A demonstration plant is really important step in developing these projects, not only because you can demonstrate your process produces the correct specification, but also you can collect really important operational data that can be fed back into your engineering of the full-scale plant. And then also you can produce very large-scale samples for customers to advance in the qualification process for your material. We have a very healthy offtake funnel. We have over 200,000 tons of product identified with specific customers at various stages of discussion. That's more than double our actual production that we'll be producing. So not all of these parties will make it through the funnel, but like I said, we have more than double our capacity. We have one term sheet signed with a company called Verkor, and we're under term sheet discussions with 10 more. This is an area that we're really focusing on this year, is to sign more offtake term sheets and also push more of those customers through the funnel.
Absolutely. Just on that, Dr. James, because that is actually one of the questions that came through via the email, and I thought I might ask that while we're on this slide. Obviously, the progress of the funnel takes a while, but how positive is it looking for the end of that funnel? Obviously, Vacor, sorry, has been a great announcement, but it seems like it's in that sort of negotiating stage. What's the likelihood of these other companies coming on board that you're talking to? Are you quite
Yeah,
confident?
so what we've really focused on in the last 6 months
Yep.
is having conversations at higher levels in the
Mhm.
customers. So not just with the procurement team. And I think we've sort of understood that the procurement team are a key sort of gates holder, right? But they're not the people who are the final decision
Decision
makers.
maker. Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
you
yeah.
need to get up into the strategy group or even the C-suite and have the conversations there. And we've been successful in doing that.
Yep.
But what we found that when we were having those conversations is that those decision makers did not understand the market dynamics in high purity manganese.
Right.
Again, just as the investor community has focused on lithium, nickel, cobalt, and potentially graphite,
Yep.
similarly in the procurement and the C-suite, because manganese is the least expensive, it's had the least amount of time spent on it in these
Yep.
OEMs.
Yep.
But if you don't have all the ingredients, you can't bake the cake,
Yeah,
right?
exactly
Particularly
right.
in high purity manganese, where this large deficit is looming. And it really doesn't matter who you talk to in terms of market analysts, they're all forecasting this deficit. So we had to go through an education process
Yeah, I was
with
going to
those
say.
C-suite and strategy group people. And we actually used a well-known consultancy to give an independent view rather than them just thinking we're talking our own story, an independent view for these educational processes and sessions. And that is now yielding positive results.
Well, that's good.
So
Yep.
it is slow, and we recognize, we put out this Vercor announcement quite a while ago,
Hmm.
but we are progressing well in terms of being able to announce further offtakes in the near future.
Very good. Very good. Because yeah, I think that's the biggest curve you got to get around the education. If people don't know that, well, where's the solution to a problem you have? You just don't know it's a problem.
That's
Um,
right.
you got to educate them. And yeah, I know there is a lot of issues not talking to a decision maker at the end of the day. So it's good to see that you're progressing through that
Yeah. Yeah.
quite well. It'll be very exciting to see those announcements. But of course, it looks like you've got a big pipeline. So I think I'll let you get back onto the slide. But how is the pipeline looking for further down the track? Are we obviously, hopefully, in the next couple of months, we'll hopefully see something. But going furthermore,
Yeah. I don't think, I think in total we'll have about 10 to 12 customers for our volume. So the fact that we've got, over 50 in discussions,
hmm,
it means that we're talking to all the right people,
yep,
and now it's a matter of moving them through the funnel and actually signing the term sheets
yep,
for the committed volume. And we need that for our bank financing. So because this is a high purity product, there's no LME market that you can hedge, So when we look to finance the project and
yeah,
put our debt in place, the banks will require 80% of our offtake under long-term contracts with
exactly,
floor prices in there,
yep,
um, so that they guarantee that they're going to get repaid.
yeah,
That's
exactly,
banks don't take any risk. The risk side is with the equity holders, and they're looking for the upside in this story. And given the supply deficit, the potential for pricing increases are very strong. Again, all the analysts that are out there are forecasting price rises with the deficit, and that's what the equity holders, will benefit from. We're already seeing high purity manganese sulfate price is increased by about 30% since the start of the year.
wow,
That's mainly being driven by the fact that manganese ore is up 100% since the start of the year, mainly because of the problems at Groot Island. The cyclone went through, took out the wharf, and Groot Island supplied about 15% of the world's manganese ore.
Wow.
If you're not an integrated producer, like the current producers, you are paid that higher price ore.
Mm.
Being an integrated producer with your own source of supply protects you from that volatility. And that's one key point as well.
Absolutely.
So moving through, so it's not just your asset, it's obviously the management team that's really important in any company. So you can see me here, President and CEO. I guess my relevant experience here is with Lynas Corporation. I was in the first 9 years of Lynas, where we developed the mine in Western Australia and the high purity processing capacity on the east coast of Malaysia. I joined Lynas, it was a $15 million market cap. I believe it's now about 8 billion. And so I've been through this journey before in terms of developing, specialty chemical mineral projects. Martina is our CFO, qualified, obviously accountant, been through Price Waterhouse, and is a native Czech, well, although she lives in Vancouver at the moment, but very passionate about the project because it's in the Czech Republic. James was at McKinsey when I was at McKinsey in London. He then went to work for Rio for 11 years and then went into the automotive industry. And he's just joined us as our VP of commercial. So he's in charge of those offtake contracts.
Mhm.
Tim Kindred is our newest member of the team. He's our project director, head of the owners team for construction. He's has a background of building billion-dollar projects, from taking them from feasibility right through to uh, operations. And he's just joined us and is based in Perth.
Yep.
Andrea is our VP of operations, ex-Hatch. Andrea developed the whole feasibility study and selected Wood as our EPCM contractor, who are now on board doing the feed engineering. And Jan is our country manager in the Czech Republic and ran the Eastern European operations for Lafarge and joined Euro Manganese about 6 years ago. So very experienced and relevant experience management team in the company. The company itself has a enterprise value of just under 40 million Canadian dollars, with 20 million Canadian dollars in the bank as at March 31, about 400 million shares on issue. And we're listed both on the ASX and the Toronto Stock Exchange Ventures Exchange. So, just to summarize, what are our key catalysts for this year? Well, it was producing on-spec high purity products, which we've now done from the fully commissioned demonstration plant. And we will start shipping tons of products through to interested parties throughout the year. Appointing our EPCM contractor, so Wood are now been appointed and are working on feed engineering, which is now ongoing. And appointing Tim was one of our goals for this year, which we've now done.
Yep.
In terms of land access, we now own 100% of the commercial site where the plant will be built. We have one ongoing land access agreement in the mine area out of 5. We expect that to be complete this year. We've completed 100% of rezoning for the mining and the commercial plant, and we received our EIA. The next stage in permitting is submitting our land planning permit, which we expect to do towards the end of this month. In terms of financing and offtakes, we talked about the offtake contracts, and that's ongoing. We are now listed on the European Investment Bank under their website under projects to be financed. So that was a move that happened earlier this year. We're now what's called under appraisal, but we expect the European Investment Bank, because this is the only manganese project in Europe, we expect to be supported by the European Investment Bank. And we also have the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development as one of our largest shareholders. So well supported by EU institutions. We expect to kick off the formal debt process in the second half of this year. And we are talking to the export credit agencies and the commercial banks who both are very engaged in the project. They like the very good ESG credentials of the project and the fact that it's part of the energy transition for Europe.
So with the under appraisal status, what is the sort of timeline or event horizon that you have in mind to be under appraisal to being fully financed and funded by a European investment bank?
Yeah, so I think they're now under appraisal means that they're doing their due diligence.
Yep.
The EU institutions take longer than the commercial banks.
Yep.
So we'll kick off the commercial banks in the second half of this year.
Yep.
Then we expect final investment decision to be in the second half of 2025.
Okay.
So
Yep.
that's when, all the debt and the equity will come together with the offtake contracts and the construction permit.
Yep. Lovely.
We are talking with OEMs and critical raw material focused funds about a project level investment. Because this is a $750 million dollar, and that's US dollar capital cost, we feel we need a partner in with the project, and we're engaged in those discussions at this point in time. We hope to close that by the end of this year. That might drag into early 2025, but that would be an important part of the financing as well.
So what's the main benefit of going with the OEM over a battery producer, for example, or vice versa?
So the OEM will more likely come with an offtake.
Yep.
It could be a battery producer could do an offtake as well, but in our discussions, it's more the OEMs which are moving upstream to secure critical raw materials. We've seen that in lithium, nickel. We've seen it now recently in graphite as well. So it's the OEMs which are, see securing critical raw materials as a key value proposition to secure their business for themselves. One project we haven't spoken about here, but we are is an earlier stage, is in Bécancour in North America, and this is not a mine. This is actually doing the last stage of processing from metal to high purity sulfate, and we have completed a scoping study, secured some land in Bécancour, which is becoming a real battery metals hub. You have GM and Ford building plants there, and all the raw material suppliers in that area, and very, very high government grants and subsidies, up to 40% of capital cost being given to projects in that area. Subject to raising some more financing for that, specifically for that project, we will kick off a feasibility study.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's the high-level story for Euro Manganese, and happy to answer any questions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We had a few sent through a little bit earlier on, which you did answer within the presentation. We also have a few from the webinar as well. So any other people that want to send through their questions, we'll take those questions now. I will say, obviously, just to start us off, the hard-hitting question is always going to be about share price. Everyone, and when we come to equity market, people always want to see that the price of the stock is going up. That's purely what it comes down to. So we do have a question coming through saying, look, share price is at all-time lows. Why aren't the major shareholders buying on market to support the price? What are your thoughts, more or less, of where the company situates right now, and more or less the timeline of, okay, what will come around the corner to really make the share price reflect that?
Yeah. So, obviously very focused and conscious of where the share price is at the moment. I would say that, we track that against a set of peers, and, what very similar share price movement to the peers. So it's a whole market thing rather than a company specific issue.
Mhm.
I think what are some of these key catalysts that we've put on this page will be key in terms of developing more support in the share price. I think particularly offtake contracts. I think that is uh, one of the key catalysts that the market is looking for. I think obviously for every seller there is a buyer, so we are getting some support in the market, but it's I think obviously a strategic investor as well at project level would also be a very key catalyst for the share price as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. It, what progress has been? Obviously, we answered this slightly before, but what progress has been made, and with James Fraser in particular, what's the importance in his role with the offtake agreements? Like from his character and more or less from his history, how has he been successful in closing these deals?
Yeah, I mean, James has the background um, in the automotive industry, in the mining industry. He's a very smart guy, and is engaging with customers on a regular daily basis. Um, going out to see them is really important to build those relationships. So I'm fully confident that James, with support, it's not just James, it's obviously the whole company have to answer questions and engage with specific customers as they do some due diligence on the company as well. That's really important.
Absolutely,
One thing I
absolutely.
didn't talk about was, you know, just a couple of, I mentioned the EBRD as an investor, and they did a significant amounts of due diligence on the company. We also have secured 100 million US financing package from Orion, the private
Yes.
equity investors. That had a significant amount of due diligence. We had specific independent companies, looking at the resource, looking at the process, looking at the market, looking at the management team, looking at the environmentals, 5 different consultants working on that due diligence for Orion. And we passed through all of that without any problems.
What did they say
We
was the
secure
most
that.
attractive thing about their investment criteria that you successfully were approved by?
So it's a royalty based financing.
Mhm.
So it's non-dilutive to the shareholders, and a gross revenue royalty of around 3.5% for 100 million US dollars. And we've drawn down 20 of that so far.
Yep.
And by the end of this year, subject to some commercial milestones, we should be able to draw down the next US 30 million. And then the last 50 million comes in at that FID. So we'll put, and we're spending this money on items which are part of that 750 million capital cost. So that capital cost is being met, by some of this expenditure. So when we get to FID, that capital cost should have dropped to actually what we need to put finance towards.
Absolutely, absolutely. Obviously, we had some questions come up through the webinar. One of them is from Thomas. He asks, "What time frames can we expect from getting funding in place to progress the Betacure feasibility study?"
So we're working actively on that. You know, I can't give a definitive date because it depends on how the discussions around a specific funding package go for that feasibility study. But I think all I can say is it's we're actively working on it, and we hope that it will be, certainly this year that we can start to kick off the feasibility study for Bécancour.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, Obviously, one more from online is there any update to the remaining 15% land purchase?
Yeah, so you know, the last land agreement, is the last man standing, holding out for I guess the best deal.
Yeah,
We are in discussions with them. We are still getting some government support around these discussions. Um, there's just a a bid offer spread at the moment, which is a bit too wide from our perspective. So we are, engaging with them, showing them, what is a fair price in the market, what have others paid, what have we paid others, and let's bring them in line with market practice. And that's what the discussions are about.
Absolutely. Because, Dr. James, it seems like you've got a very interesting gap in the market that you could fill. It's just a matter of time of how much you're going to be filling from it.
That's
I
right.
think, I
By the
think,
time we come into production, in sort of 27, 28, there will be a deficit in the market, and it's it needs to be filled. And we have a couple of other projects coming along, and they need to be successful as well, because success will breed success in this market.
absolutely, absolutely. We have one final question that came through, and I think this does talk a little bit more about your pipeline, and more or less it might be a bit of a dream pipeline to see how things go. But how long before you see the full swing of production sales of a product?
Yeah, so assuming we get the final investment decision away in 2025, the end of 2025, it's then a 2 to 2.5 year build. We'll get that final schedule out of the feed engineering. And we're currently working on a 2 to 2.5 year build for the project. So that's 26, 27. So commissioning in late 27, early 28, 6-month commissioning period. And then in our financial model, we have a 12-month ramp-up period. So full swing, full production will be 2029.
Very exciting.
Obviously building up to that through 2027, 28.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, what I'll ask is, as these last final questions come through, for those new investors or existing investors, Dr. James, that have been around or looking to get into the stock, what's the one reason why they should consider, or at least do some more further research with regards to Euro Manganese today?
Well, I think it is a very good buying opportunity at these prices. We are well on our way to being the first high purity manganese project in development outside of China, which is critical for the US and the European market, driven by legislation. And it's often the overlooked battery metal. So, whilst lithium stocks have run and nickel have run, manganese stocks have yet to get into that deficit position and benefit from the higher pricing, which will come.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I think that's all the questions that we've got for today. I think it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on for our webinar today. This has been recorded. Obviously, this will be up on YouTube. We look forward to all the people that have turned up today. If you missed anything or want to go back and have a watch, it'll be up on our social media on YouTube, so you can have a read of that. But Dr. James, thank you so much for attending the webinar with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Hopefully we can see you in the next one very soon.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Everyone have a lovely day.